Hello and welcome to another episode of Statford Bridge, Chelsea by the numbers. Chelsea lose again. 2 wins from the last 10. And, you know, I think this is going to be a weird podcast because I think a lot of people are pretty upset about that game. I'm pretty upset about that game. And I think this is going to fall into the same category as many other Chelsea games of Chelsea were good in the first half. They died in the second half. Maresca didn't change anything. Blah, 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 blah. And, I really don't think that's the case for this game. I actually thought Chelsea were somewhere between fine and good in this game, punctuated with some truly dreadful individual errors. And, from a stats perspective, you go away to Aston Villa, who are a good, not great team. They're in a similar bucket to you. You play them about even away in the middle of an injury crisis that you are missing your starting striker. You are missing probably your best winger. You're missing your second best center back. You have literally not a single midfielder you can sub on that isn't a child. And you play an about even game. And I think it's very frustrating to come away from games like that and be like, yeah, you played about even in a game that that playing even is probably acceptable. This is not a team who is close to winning a title that going away to Villa and playing about even is a disaster. That's where this team is that you go away to Villa and you play about even. That's acceptable. That is acceptable right now for a Champions League competitive team. That is a totally reasonable performance. And that sucks that that's where we are, but that is where we are. And it doesn't really help to get lost over that. From a stats perspective, 2.3 on XG. Again, I think this is somewhat misleading because both teams have 0.95 XG chances. Chelsea's is earned by a good bit of play and an action that they repeatedly exploited throughout the game and resulted in that very good chance, but also a number of other quite close to good chances that didn't quite pull off, but they got that action of Neto in the channel behind Maatsen quite frequently. And excuse me. And on the other side, their 0.95 chance comes from just an insane Malo Gusto error, which I said on Twitter, and people were like, Gusto didn't make a mistake. What are you talking about? I've literally never seen a defender take such a good first touch for the attacker before. So you call it a 2.3 to a 1.5 or something, and all of a sudden this feels very different and whatever. Even on big chances created, Chelsea a little bit of an edge on shot, Villa a little bit of an edge on box touches. They played it about even. When you look at the comparison to the year prior was a 2-2 draw. Chelsea had a 0.5 XG difference. They were down 2-0 and chasing the game. 21 shots to 9. It was a solid performance, probably better than Chelsea played yesterday. I think that's certainly the case. Across the season, the metrics are the metrics. It's something like half an expected goal difference. The shot volume difference is significant. All those things. We talk about this every week. There's no point. To me, excuse me, the most interesting thing to talk about is that tactically things are very, very different in this game. And this was a thing that I was getting a lot of replies about on Twitter. If you go look at any of my tweets from the game, it's Maresca has no plan B. He never tweaks anything. There's never any changes. And what are we talking about? Reece James plays in midfield. Malo Gusto is a fullback overlapping around the outside, which we've seen basically never this season. Cole Palmer starts as a right winger. I think that's the first time that has happened this season. Maybe Man City, the first game of the year. Neto starts as a false 9 and Kunku as a winger. Enzo as a pure 10. We haven't seen like any of those things all year. How are we going to talk about Chelsea are not playing differently? If you look at the stats bot stuff, Chelsea's defensive action height, which is right behind my camera so you can't see it. Chelsea's defensive action height, 42. That's extremely low for them. Chelsea gave up more than 50% of the ball. That's extremely rare for them. The field tilt, they were 40% field tilt. That's probably their lowest of the season. We've been talking about, I want Enzo Maresca to defend deeper. I want them to press less. I want them to look to transition and counter. They did that in this game. That was how they played in this game, was they defended deeper and they looked to transition through Pedro Neto into the channels. That was exactly how Chelsea played this game. That's totally different than how they've played all year. It kind of worked. And, I mean, like, what are we talking about? No plan B, no tweaks, no changes. Like, this is totally different. Whatever gripes you have about the game yesterday, and there are many gripes to have, I don't think it is a valid gripe to say, well, Enzo Maresca didn't change anything. I don't think that's a real thing you can say. I don't think that's true even a little bit. Now, do we want to talk about the subs? Sure, because I can go look and I can say, well, they made one sub in the 8th minute, which was an enforced change from injury, and then you made one sub the rest of the way, and Jadon Sancho was not particularly useful when it came on. What about Shim? What about Tyreek George? What about Dewsbury Hall? What about whatever options? They made 5 subs. Like, is it a shock that they were able to push on and win the game? If you look at the XG timing chart, Chelsea can see the equalizer and create basically nothing the rest of the way while Villa bring on sub after sub after sub after sub as they put the pressure on. Maybe. I think that's probably a valid complaint. I've been pretty consistent that I hate the subs the whole year. I don't really know what you want me to say on that one. But I don't think it is a valid complaint to say Chelsea didn't do anything differently. So, looking at it, at the tactics board, I think we saw a couple interesting things. One, Gusto, I did not think had a very good game, but I thought structurally Gusto wide, Palmer coming inside from right wing spaces worked really, really, really well. I thought Palmer got many more touches in dangerous areas in this game than he has comparatively to other games of late. I didn't think Palmer had a very good game, but I thought he was able to get the ball facing forward in dangerous areas much more frequently. And I thought that one of the really big benefits of that is that Enzo Fernandez was able to crash the box a lot. So when when Palmer plays as a 10, Palmer is often drifting out, right? When Chelsea are in the final third, he wants to come outside of the box to link. He doesn't want to arrive in the 6-yard box. Enzo Fernandez was arriving in the 6-yard box, and that's Chelsea's first goal, right? Neto curls his run out to get into the channel, gets played in depth, rinses Ian Matson, and Enzo Fernandez arrives in the 6-yard box for a tap-in. That's a great goal. That's a goal that comes from the structure that you are trying to create, and it works. Like, that's an awesome goal. It worked really well. And I'm going to shout out CFC Central, Sam, because he was talking about what if we do Neto as a false 9, where he's very much like linking things and then sprinting into channels. And I said I would rather have malaria until the end of time. And actually, this worked really well. I was totally wrong. Sam was spot on. I thought Neto actually did a surprisingly good job holding the ball up against center backs. He obviously isn't winning anything in the air. And you could see there were so many times he's looking at Jorgensen like, why are you kicking it long to me? And we're going to talk about Jorgensen. But I thought for ground passes, he actually did quite a good job linking things. And I thought he was very active running in depth, which is the main thing that has been lacking without Nico Jackson, is that Nkunku doesn't threaten depth. He can't run anymore. So having Neto to make these runs into the channel on both sides was extremely valuable for Chelsea. Gusto holding width on the right and Palmer coming inside from right spaces, I think was very, very helpful for him, as I said. But I also think it was really helpful for Chelsea's build-up play in general, where one of the things I don't like is that when it's the winger wide and the fullback inside, is that when you end up on the left-hand side of the pitch, right? So Villa defend in a 4-4-2, 4-2-3-1, and you end up on the left-hand side of the pitch, and everything gets bunched over, and you have the free man on the opposite side being Gusto and not Palmer, and then the winger is the spare one. Nobody cares enough to respect that, and if he gets it in that spot, like, it's not really dangerous. Whereas when you flip them and it's Palmer inside and Gusto full width, well, now actually this is really scary, because if Palmer gets it there, he's such an accomplished passer, or he can drive and shoot or whatever, that you have to mark this. And because you have to mark this, it means that if you can get through midfield, you can get Gusto into really, really high quality box final third entries or box entries or really high quality 1v1s. He didn't do very much with them, but I thought it made a lot more sense structurally, which I keep saying, but I thought it made a lot more sense. And I wouldn't be shocked if we saw that come back. And I actually thought Chelsea defended the transitions quite well. I don't think Malo Gusto was caught out that often. I think in particular, having Reece James as the other defensive midfielder made a very natural cover for Malo Gusto in that spot. I don't think Reece James, again, I don't think he had an amazing game either, but I thought he was in really good spaces. I thought he was very good defending transitions. I thought he was a little bit sloppy in possession and uncomfortable, particularly playing with his back to play very often, right? Like, if I do the thing with his arms, like, I thought he was very uncomfortable receiving with his back to play. But it's also the first time he's played midfield in like 3 years. So more, 4 or 5 years now. So I thought it worked pretty well for what it is. To me, there's two things that are of interest to me, and that I think Enzo Maresca will want to change, is that, again, the defensive structure was pretty lacking. Villa basically kept 4 players high all the time, which is how they play very, 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 very frequently. Augusto dropped back into right back. And what we've seen of late is that Chelsea defend something like 4-1-4-1 with Moises Caicedo being the free player in the middle of the park, who is either jumping or is screening the last line. And the problem that we saw with this game is that very frequently Reece James and Enzo Fernandez would be drawn high, and Nkunku would also be drawn high, and you'd be left with this like weird asymmetry of like Palmer and Caicedo deeper. And especially when they would push a fullback high, sometimes Maatsen, often Matty Cash, you'd end up with a situation where Moises Caicedo is trying to screen 3 players at the same time. And Palmer is also not really tracking the way we have seen normally, right? Where one of the wingers follows all the way back. And so you'd end up in this situation where Moises Caicedo has so many players to screen, but also it's kind of unclear who is marking versus going to the center back versus going to the 6. And Villa were able to play into midfield or to play direct passes into Watkins or Morgan Rogers. And like Tosin and Colwill, for their many qualities, are not very good at the man marking in big spaces thing. They're both really slow. Colwill's not really slow, but he's kind of slow. And Tosin is strong, but he's so slow that he has to mark way off of the 9 lest he get done into the channel. He can't get close and destroy him physically, because if he gets close, Watkins is going to spin him and go in behind. And that was a really, really big problem for Chelsea, was Emi Martinez going direct into the front line and not being able to win first balls and suffocate things or pick up second balls because the spaces were too big. And this, I think, has been a repeated problem of late, that there's not enough pressure on the ball high up the pitch. And what we saw a lot of was actually when Chelsea had good moments was when they didn't press. They dropped much deeper into what was a pretty traditional 4-4-2, not with a high line like we saw against City. And Nkunku and Neto became your front 2. Enzo Fernandez became the left of the three, and this was how you managed, the 4-4-2, and I thought that worked. I thought that worked quite well. Now, again, ultimately, you look at the whole game and you're going to say, well, Chelsea lost and had another bad second half, right? Like if I go look at the XG numbers for the second half, it's again 1.5 to 0.7. The first half was 1.5 to 0.8. Like not tremendously different, but again, I think you have to very, very heavily weight the Malo Gusto error for their goal. And I saw people being like, oh, it's not that bad. He was trying to clear it. I mean, you see exactly the same moment 15 minutes later where they cross to the back post and Gusto just clears it instead of trying to take a perfect first touch. And it's like, yeah, well, why didn't you just do that the first time? So that is what it is. But I think largely, and it's very frustrating to me that the colors on this plot are reversed, that Chelsea are the purple color and Villa are the blue color. But like I think the tactical things mostly worked. I think there is definitely some signal there that Chelsea ran out of gas in the second half, particularly on the attacking side. I thought they were much less able to generate chances in the second half. Particularly after the Villa goal, they had like one more transition and then that was it. The last 30 minutes they really got nothing. But I think like those things sort of worked, like some defensive issues aside, but I think it mostly worked. So, and then of course you come to the end and like Jorgensen makes a horrific error. Like it's funny, he grades out as like mostly in line with his expected goals because I actually thought he had an okay game. Like he made a good save from Watkins on the angle, he made a good save on a square to Watkins, he made a good save on a through ball to Daniel Malin, and then he lets in a howler, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how you played the rest of the game because you let in an absolute horror show. And I don't know who's going to play against Southampton. I think it probably doesn't matter who you play. There's going to be errors in some way, shape, or form, and they're all going to be something like average towards the end of it. So in terms of projections, the year over year, Chelsea are now down to +4 on where they were. So Chelsea are 67 instead of 63. Newcastle beat Forest. City lost to Liverpool. Bournemouth lost to Wolves. Those were all actually quite favorable results for Chelsea in the interest of the chasing pack. So the losing to Villa is not the end of the world, but it's certainly not a good result. Somebody posted a new tool, analytic-fpl, that Streamlit app, that I think is pretty useful. It has Chelsea as 5th with 64 points and Forest at 66. I think that's very unlikely that Forest finish with 66 points, but we'll see. And then on the probabilities perspective, it has Chelsea as something like 5th most likely for Champions League, right? 45-ish plus 10, 55-ish% for Champions League, which I think is maybe a little high. I would probably have them a little lower than that, but I think is not out of the realm of possibility. Again, it's going to matter how many points Chelsea pick up and also how long guys like Jackson and Madueke and Fofana, etc. are actually out for. So that's where it's at. So another disappointing result. Chelsea plays Southampton on Tuesday, which is very much a must win, especially when you look at Forest are playing Arsenal and Newcastle and Bournemouth. Yeah, Newcastle have Liverpool and Bournemouth, I believe, have somebody not easy. They have Brighton. So, like, there's another world where all those teams around you drop points, and now you're up to 46, and you're back and forth, and it is what it is. City have Spurs. Like, it's not an easy set of games around you. You got to win. You got to put the points on the board. That's the reality of the situation. The last thing I want to talk about is much more data focused. There was a an article from Training Ground Guru. I like teased this a couple hours before this came out that Chelsea hired Javi Fernandez as their director of data science. Javi was formerly the lead for the Barcelona Innovation Hub, which, for those unaware, was probably the single best like research and development for analytics group. Um, and I say research and development because not a lot of what they did found its way onto the field. If you look up some of their old research papers, there's a ton of like genuinely tremendous literature. Um, there's a paper with Javi and Luke Bourne's group. Luke Bourne is like an NBA guy who also did some soccer stuff that was looking at tracking data. It was one of the first public papers with tracking data and was like really, really revolutionary at the time. After Barca, Javi went to Zealous Analytics. Zealous was Luke Bourne's platform. They were the analytics group behind Redbird. Redbird is the ownership who owned Toulouse and AC Milan. Toulouse, in particular, were taken from a second division team to the Europa League in 3 seasons. They won the French Cup. Their transfer strategy is similar-ish to Chelsea's in that it's pretty focused on player trading and young players. They've hit pretty well. People who I know at Zealous or who were formerly at Zealous speak incredibly highly of Javi. And I mean, some of you will have seen his stuff in like the Friends of Tracking series. He is an incredibly well-regarded hire. I think I was somewhat negative on the Sachin Gupta hire based on things I had heard. Whereas in this case, everything I have heard about Javi Fernandez is incredibly, incredibly positive. His background is very, very heavily on using AI stuff. Part of his PhD thesis looked at using like physical sensor data, so like the GPS vests and stuff like that, to identify a injury risk model that had fewer red flags than the current techniques that were being used. And I think a couple of people have asked me, like, what is his role going to be? And I can only speculate, right? Like, I'm not in the room. I don't know what the director of data science at Chelsea is going to be doing. But I think between Javi and Sachin Gupta and some of the other data hires they've made that are engineers or are doing like back end work, there is a tremendous amount of utility in building out a legitimate research and development department at Chelsea to build institutional knowledge, right? Like a couple of episodes ago, many episodes ago now, I did a rant about substitutions, right? And how there's all this research and all this literature that teams should be using and consulting for their literature for their club, and having a legitimate data science department to investigate longer term projects outside of the manager and the immediate needs, right? Where so many analytics departments are so bogged down in the week to week of match analysis, the window to window of transfer stuff, that it's very difficult to build longer term systems. We spoke to on the American Soccer Analysis podcast, which is like the American analytics group that we do some stuff with, that we spoke to Matt Pfeffer, who's like the director of analytics for the Colorado Rapids. Colorado work with Arsenal, and he spoke about how the first year basically was just building all the tools and pipelines to do all the research they need to do to support the team. And now they have turned around from one of the worst franchises in the league to a very, very strong development franchise. And I think having people who can build the bigger picture is tremendously useful. Do I think Javi is going to have a tremendous amount of impact on the team Maresca picks or the tactics he plays? No, I don't. Do I think that having a really, really strong analytics department with tools, but also a tremendous amount of research to build institutional knowledge is valuable to the on pitch? Absolutely, right? Like you're going to be able to better identify players. You're going to be able to make better decisions in things that come up. Like one, a huge part of Liverpool being so good is that they had such a well-stocked data department under Michael Edwards that they were able to start teaching Jurgen Klopp things over time. So he got better as a coach. He was a better coach when he left Liverpool than when he started. Arne Slot has leaned into the same things, right? Where, hey, we've done years and years of research and done A, B, C, D, and E that we know this works and you're going to do it because that's why we hired you. So these things take time. You're not going to see the impact of this next week. You're probably not even going to see the impact of it this season, but I would wager you'll see the impact of this in the summer window. You will see the impact of this next season. You will see the impact of this season after that. So this is something I think is very, very exciting. Again, I'm kind of unaware of the qualifications of Willie Issa or whatever, the rugby guy they hired, and the sports performance directors they all have. I don't know, right? But this I know. This I know is a very, very good hire. So hopefully we will see some positive growth on this side of things. Anyways, that's all from me. We'll do a pod after Southampton. Hopefully we start winning soon. As always, enjoy the soccer.